Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode on the value of labor. And I'm joined today by my esteemed guest, Mike Aquilina, who is a famous Catholic author and speaker, and just a man full of wisdom. And I first met Mike not in person, but through his write-in in an article that he wrote last year on Joseph, St. Joseph, and the value of labor. And today we're going to be diving into that and specifically around the theme of why work. There's a lot of buzz around these days around, do we even have to work? Is there any value in work? Is it better to just win the lottery and just stay home and do our hobbies all day? So today we're going to dive into that question. And to start us off, Mike, I'd just love for you to introduce yourself and to just share a little bit on why you chose to write about the value of work, the value of labor.
Hmm. Well, I chose to write about it because work is something we all have to do. It's how we get through our days. Even if we say, I really don't feel like getting a job, we still have to do work. We have to get ourselves dressed in the morning. We have to make our meals and that sort of thing in order to eat. So work is something that's universal. It's something that we're made for, and our circumstances demand. It's also a social obligation, and I think that's what a lot of people are missing today, this idea that we're made to serve one another. We're made for one another. It's not good for the man to be alone. We read in the book of Genesis, but that should be obvious to us. We need other people. If we decide that we're going to live at home and stay in our sweats and never leave our man cave or whatever it is, we're still dependent on others for everything. We're dependent on others for the food we eat. If we're gonna waste our hours playing video games, those video games are made by someone else, and they are an object of work, of labor. So again, for all the things we love, for all the things we enjoy, for all the things that are necessary to us,
Hmm.
someone has to work for them,
Yes.
and we have an obligation to work for others. This is how society operates. This is how society functions. We're needed not just as consumers, we're needed as producers too, and as
Hmm.
laborers.
Yeah. No, that is so true. And do you feel like the view of work in general has changed, and even your view of work over the years?
My view of work changes from hour to hour, depending
Oh.
depending on how I feel, how hard the task is, and how long I've been working at it. So yes, our
That's
view
true.
of labor often changes depending on circumstances. And I'd say, yeah, I've probably matured in my approach to it. There's certainly an element of pride in work that can be good, and there's an element of pride in it that can be corrupt as well. And so we have to watch out for that as we get into our careers, and as we advance in our careers. What are we working for? And
Hmm.
my hope is that over time we do develop a more mature attitude toward work. I write music, and I know that's
Oh.
one of the jobs I do. And my songwriting partner became very famous very young. But he said that early on in life, what he worked for was the fame, for the
Hmm.
rush of it, for having
Hmm.
all this money, for having all this power, for having all this glory. Um,
Hmm.
and then, he had an epiphany about age of 28,
Hmm.
where he saw that it was destroying him. These
Hmm.
these desires for lesser things, and so he developed a more mature attitude toward the work he did, toward the
Hmm.
music he produced, and so on. So he continued to do work, but no longer seeking those other things, and he
Yeah.
managed to have a very productive, very happy career. Whereas a lot of his colleagues who stayed on the track that they were on when they got famous at age 17 or 18 or 22, um,
Yeah.
they went on this downward spiral, and they burned out, or
Yeah.
some of them died.
Hmm.
There's so many temptations you face.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's our attitude should change toward our work as we get older, because I hope we're going to mature over that time, and
Yeah.
work is going to be an elemental and important part of our life at every stage.
Yeah. Oh, I so wholeheartedly agree with you that there have been times in my career where I've been focused on making as much money as I could or working with high-ranking clients. And I realized how empty that felt and
Mm.
how I was just living for myself or living for the opinion of other people. And you, as you know, like people's opinion of you can change in a heartbeat.
Yes,
And so if you're
yes,
constantly trying to chase after others' opinion, like you're just never settled. I was never settled with my heart. And so there came a shift for me a few years ago where I realized that, oh wait, I've been given gifts and talents, not just for myself, but for the benefit of others.
that's
And
right.
I've been given those gifts by my creator in heaven. And when I began to work for him and out of his desires for me, oh gosh, like tremendous peace came.
Yes, yes. There's a certain satisfaction you can achieve just by doing something well for the
Yes,
sake of others,
yes,
but once you add the supernatural dimension, once you're doing this for the sake of God,
yeah,
well, then it becomes something beautiful. Uh,
mm,
and I believe that's what we're created for, that
yes,
we're created to work for God. It's not just to get money, it's not just to get food, it's not just to get status. We're made to work for God. And so even if we don't become very successful by the world standards, even if we don't become famous, even if we don't win awards,
mm,
even if we're the one who's always coming in third, whatever,
mm,
even our failures can be something pleasing to God, because when
yeah,
God sent his son into the world, he sent his son as a laborer, someone who did work, a carpenter, right? And he was
yes.
known as the carpenter and the carpenter's son. So he was a worker. Jesus was a worker,
Mm,
and if you look at the end of Jesus' ministry, he failed by every worldly standard. He
yeah,
died on the cross after horrible tortures,
yeah,
and he was mocked by the people who had formerly loved him. But I think we look at that failure now as the
mm,
ultimate success, because it saved us, it saved the world, and we can
good,
unite our work with that effort, that work, that labor,
yeah,
that Christ worked on the cross, the action that Christ worked on the cross, and then we can sanctify our work. It becomes something holy because it's united with the sacrifice of Jesus Christ.
oh, absolutely. And I'd love for you even to dive into that a little bit further, because in your article you talk about from the beginning, work is a basic part of our human nature,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
it starts in Genesis. So I'd love for you to just break that open for us.
It does start in Genesis, and it's not only part of our nature, it's presented as part of God's nature, which is
Yes.
an amazing thing. God is shown in the act of creation as a worker, a laborer, right? It says
Mhm.
that he made the earth. Let me see what we have here. We're talking about the first pages of the Bible, and it says that God made the firmament and separated the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were, no, the waters. I need to adjust my glasses here.
You're
Um,
okay.
and God made the firmament and separated the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. Okay. So what he's presented as someone who's working, right? He's
Yeah.
doing hydraulics, he's moving water around, he's engineering the universe. And it
Yeah.
continues that way on the next page. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. It's a remarkable thing when you think about it, because he's laboring. Why is he doing this? He doesn't need to do this. He doesn't
Yeah.
need light. He
Yeah.
doesn't need water. Why
Yeah.
is he doing this? He's doing this out of love, out of
Yeah.
service. He's giving himself for the sake of those he will create. He's
Yeah.
doing all this for the sake of the human person. It's a beautiful thing. And then something remarkable happens at the climax of creation. We're told that God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Right. So man is made in a sense godlike. Well, what do we see God doing in the verses
Working.
leading up to this. He's working, right?
Yeah.
Right. So then we see God making man and making man godlike. How is he godlike? God says, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over the cattle and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. That's work. Dominion over those things entails work. And then later on, uh, God says, fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion. And he goes again through the list over the fish of the sea and so on. And in the second chapter, we have kind of a close-up version of the creation story.
Mhm.
And it presents God as resting on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. So we
Mhm.
see God as working, as a worker,
Yeah.
and man who's made in his image and likeness as a worker too.
Yeah.
And man is godlike in his work. He's co-creating with God. This is what Adam is working for. God tells him, in the garden that his job is to till it and keep it.
Mhm.
So Adam has a task to do. He's made to do it. He's built to do it. Okay.
Mhm.
He's given these body parts, these opposable thumbs, so that he can do his work most effectively
Yeah.
as the one who has dominion over the earth.
Which is a mind-boggling concept
Yes.
that God trusts us so much to not only give us the ability to do what he does, but to do it like he does
Yeah.
and do things well and to be creative. Because just think of the creativity it took to make a simple leaf.
Yeah. And this message is in our bodies. It's
Mhm.
also in the scriptures. If in the Judeo-Christian tradition, it's there, the first page of the
Yeah.
Bible,
Yeah.
and it continues throughout the Bible, both the Old Testament and the New Testament. The message is constant that there's this dignity to work, that we're
Mhm.
wired for work from the
Yes.
beginning, and we're not going to be satisfied if we're not working to our utmost potential. And we have
Yeah.
to do all of this for God's sake. There's an interesting element to the creation story that we miss, I think, but the early rabbis really understood.
Okay.
And that is that it presents Adam as not only a guy, but as a priest, that he is
Mhm.
created as a priest over creation. When he's told um, to to till the garden and keep it, well, those are verbs that in Hebrew are
Mhm.
only used together to describe the work of the priests in the sanctuary, in the
Mhm.
tabernacle, and later in the temple. So it's a priestly act that God is calling Adam to. A priest is someone who offers sacrifice and mediates between God and man. That's the
Mhm.
definition of a priest in the ancient world. In the
Mhm.
temple, they offered the sacrifice of animals and sometimes the sacrifice of bread and wine. Um, but they offered sacrifice. Well, what was Adam's sacrifice? Because there are no altars on earth at this time.
Yeah.
Adam's sacrifice was supposed to be the entirety of the earth, and he was supposed to offer it up, make
Mhm.
the priestly action with his work. And all
Mhm.
this happened before there was any original sin, before there
Yeah.
was any fall from grace. Adam
Mhm.
was created to work and given the world to work as his priesthood.
Yeah. And with that, there's something that you mentioned in your article that was just really beautiful, that him being a priest or acting in the form of a priest through his work actually becomes a form of worship,
Yes,
which
yes.
is just so beautiful. Can you explain that a bit further?
Well, we have to understand how the people of Israel, the people who produced the scriptures, looked upon priesthood, right?
Mhm.
They saw these people acting on behalf of their nation, right?
Mhm.
Or earlier in the narrative, earlier in the Bible, we have the patriarchs acting
Mhm.
as priests who are
Mhm.
mediators, and they're offering sacrifice on behalf of their people, their
Yeah.
tribe, or their
Yeah.
family, or their nation. They're still making an offering something to God. And
Yeah.
um and so that's what we're all called to do. We're given something to do from 9 to 5 or whatever our work shift is. And
Mhm.
and that's supposed to be our priestly sacrifice that can transform the way you look at work,
Yeah.
because suddenly then you don't want to procrastinate,
Yeah.
because if you procrastinate, you're like those priests whom the prophets excoriated because they offered blemished sacrifices. Now, God doesn't
Mm,
need an unblemished sacrifice, but
yeah.
he makes these rules, these regulations. He provides parameters on a task
Mm-hmm.
in order to discipline us, because
Yeah,
discipline is a necessary thing.
it
We're all
is.
out of whack, and we need to learn to do things well, and we need to have a motivation to do things
Mm-hmm.
well. If we're looking at our daily work as a priestly offering on behalf of others and for
Yeah.
God's sake, then we're looking at it with love, and
Yeah.
we're doing it even though it's hard, even though it's burdensome, even though, I might not particularly like this job that I have. We're
Yeah.
doing it out of love.
Yes. Oh, I agree. And just even thinking for anyone who's listened that may be a stay-at-home mom or somebody that is in a job, like you just said, that they don't even like,
Yeah.
even that those situations, that context is still an opportunity for you to love, even in
Yes.
the small things, and to do those
Yes.
small things well. Because by doing them well, like you were just saying, we imitate God, and
Yes.
we truly bless other people, and we when we bring our best selves to the kitchen, to our kids, to our workplaces that are just maybe dysfunctional. But when we bring the best of ourselves, then we are like God, and we are truly loving.
Yeah. And I look back at my father when, I'm the youngest of seven children.
Oh wow.
And my father was a welder for a
Okay.
coal company.
Okay.
He was a laborer, union member, and he worked for the same coal company for, let me do the math here, almost 50 years. Almost
Wow.
50 years doing the same thing day in and day out. And I watched him go to work for all those days, and I actually don't know whether he enjoyed welding or not.
Oh really?
He never talked about it that way. He never talked about it. But here's what I believe,
Uh-huh.
that when he went to work and when he was using a blowtorch, he was loving me, and he was
Yeah.
loving my mom, and he
Yeah.
was loving my siblings. That all of
Mhm.
that work was done as an act of love
Yeah.
for my sake. So he
Yeah.
was he was mediating for me. He was
Mm.
doing something for God,
Yeah.
but he was loving me through that action. And
Oh.
if we can make all of our work an act of love, as my dad did, I think
Hmm.
we'll be a lot happier. Again,
Yeah.
even if it's not a job we particularly enjoy,
Yeah.
we can look at that aspect of it, the love, the offering, the mediation, the sacrifice, the service to others, and then we'll
Hmm.
get some fulfillment out of it, more fulfillment out of it, and even much
Yeah.
fulfillment out of it, in
Yeah.
spite of all of our aversions.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great example and just a wonderful witness of your father. And I used to work for an oil and gas company many years ago, and I
Yeah,
worked with many welders, and it
yeah.
is a tough job.
Well, I'll take your word for it. They didn't have take your kid to school day, take your kid to work day back then, so I never got out of school for that. Uh, but
Yeah.
I would occasionally hear him talk about it, but in
Yeah.
always a neutral way.
Yeah.
But again, he did it very faithfully for all those years, and apparently he
Mhm.
did it well, because he worked that way until he was almost 80.
Wow. Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah. Well, they didn't want him
Oh.
to retire, so they even
Aw.
gave him kind of special permission to come in whenever he wanted and leave whenever he
Oh.
wanted, because he was good at what he did, I suppose.
Aw.
And they didn't want to lose a skilled worker.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Wow. That's really, really great. Thank you for sharing that. Well, so something that you touched on a little bit earlier was about many think that work itself is a punishment or a consequence of sin. Like when they think of Adam and Eve being kicked out of the garden and God said, "Don't come back here." I mean, in many words, that work itself was the punishment. However, you share that that's not the case. Can you break that down a bit for us?
I can remember an advertisement some years ago that used some classic artwork that depicted the Garden of Eden, and it
Okay.
was just a picture of Adam and Eve in leisurely poses, kind of just lounging about as if we daiquiris would appear in our hands, if we had not committed sin, and that's not true to the text. all
Yeah.
of those all of those passages that I read earlier took place before the fall.
Yeah.
So this is Adam created in goodness, and God says it was very good at the end of that
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
And he was created to work. He was
Yeah.
created to work. So that was part of our nature from the beginning. I think it's a terrible idea that that life in the garden would have been a life of just unrelenting leisure.
Yeah.
Because I think that in the garden we were given work, and we were given work that would be satisfying to us. Now,
Mm-hmm.
after the fall, that changed, and we find that work was burdensome to Adam.
Mm-hmm.
There were
Mm-hmm.
thorns and thistles, and the earth was resisting him.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't the laborer he was supposed to be. He had fallen
Yeah.
from grace, and he was out of sync with nature. He was out of sync with the earth, and that
Mm.
continues to our own day. We all have to fight these thorns and thistles in our work.
Yeah.
So yes, I think I think it's wrong, and it's damaging for us to think
Mm-hmm.
of work as a consequence of original sin. It's
Mm-hmm.
clearly not so from the text of Scripture.
Yeah. And I agree with you. And it does, knowing that makes work even more beautiful. It makes all the little things worth it to know that
Yes.
I'm not being punished because I have to work. I'm
Yeah.
actually becoming more like God by working and through my work.
Yes. And that's we see that throughout the Holy Scriptures, that Adam was a worker. We see that his children were. Cain and Abel were both
Mm,
workers.
that's
They were
true.
either farming or working the herds, right?
Hmm.
And then it continues because Noah was a mariner, and uh,
Mm,
and Abraham was a herdsman, and Jacob was a farmer. David was a herdsman. So all of the great heroes of of um, of Hebrew culture were
hmm.
presented as laborers, and
Yeah.
this is something that distinguishes Israel from all other nations.
Okay.
That it looked to workers as having a special dignity, and as having the potential to become heroes.
Hmm. So actually, that leads me to my next question. In your article, you talk a little bit about how the Jewish people viewed manual labor and how different that was from the Greeks or the Romans, and even the fact that Christ was a carpenter. Like just over
Yes,
time, it was a radical concept. Can you explain that a bit?
certainly. It's uh, in the classical world, it's a constant, really, to have a certain disdain
Mm,
for laborers. Herodotus says that this is a universal sentiment, that upper class people, aristocrats, the people who were seen as having a real impact on history and on events, they had disdain for common laborers. Um,
mm,
and we find this everywhere. We find it in all of the greats. It's there in Plato. It's there in Aristotle. Uh, the social historian Paul Vane, French social historian, put it
mm,
put it very strikingly. He said that the ancients' contempt for labor, their undisguised scorn for those who work with their hands, their exaltation of leisure as the sine qua non of a liberal life, the only life worthy of a man. Not only was the worker was not only was the worker regarded as a social inferior, he was
mm,
base, ignoble. And again, this plays out in all of the greats. In Aristotle, Aristotle says, indeed, the best regulated states will not permit a mechanic to be a citizen.
oh my
But if
gosh.
it is allowed, then we cannot then attribute the virtue we have described to every citizen or freeman, but only those who are disengaged from servile offices. For it is impossible, for it is impossible for one who lives the life of a mechanic or hired servant to acquire the practice of virtue. This
Oh
is
my gosh.
Aristotle. And of course it echoes through all of the great voices of antiquity. You'll find it as late as Plotinus, but this was so radically different from the voice of Israel. You know,
Mm-hmm.
what you find there is not only all of those great heroes who were laborers, but also you find the voice of the prophets who
Mm-hmm.
cried out for justice for workers, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Kind treatment, just treatment of those who are in the servile class and could be
Yeah.
easily oppressed.
Yeah.
So what we find in Israel is something radically different from what's going on in the rest of the world, and which, as I said before, Herodotus said was a universal sentiment.
Yeah, which is it's so crazy to me that they
Yeah.
would have such an opinion on workers because they're the ones that are actually uplifting
Yes.
society.
Yes. And I love it. You know, you say it sounds so crazy to you. Why does it sound so crazy to you? Because Christianity succeeded and
Mm,
overturned the
that's
world,
true.
revolutionized our attitudes toward work, toward labor.
Yeah,
And this continued through thousands of years. It's still continuing today, so that
yeah,
we do have a slightly better attitude toward
yeah,
laborers, just
yeah,
slightly. But still, you know, you have that in you, that you recoil from what Aristotle says, even though,
yeah.
you know, he would have been just seeing a lot of nods in the audience when he was saying it.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing you also mentioned earlier or in your article was that even the Roman gods, how they depicted them as ones who just sat around, drank, were
Right. And
just in.
always getting into trouble. Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
versus in contrast, God the Father working and
Yes.
Jesus, his son, working, and
Right.
like it's
Right.
just so different.
And then all of Jesus' disciples, of course, present themselves as laborers, as workers. They
That's
were
very true.
fishermen, farmers, tax collectors.
Yeah,
Paul was a tent maker. We
yeah,
find Paul referring to all of these other people who worked at crafts, a dealer in purple dyes. So you have a sales force there.
yeah,
You have a coppersmith mentioned in one of Paul's letters. All of these things are trades, and they're looked at as compatible with a very noble Christian life.
yeah. Ah, which is so good. And so, okay, in your article, you also mentioned you quote Saint Clement of Alexandria. I'm going to read it right now. Where let's see. Reminded new converts that there is no need for them to quit their jobs. Tend to your farming if you are a farmer, but know God while you labor in the fields. Sail if navigation is your profession, but invoke always the celestial pilot, which is just showing us that
Yeah.
in our daily lives we can and we should encounter God. And
Yes.
but yeah, can you explain that a bit more and why you chose to
Oh
bring
yeah.
that up in your
Be-
article?
because I wanted to talk about the difference with early Christianity.
Mhm.
One of the earliest anti-Christian tracts is by a man named Celsus or Celsus,
Okay.
and he wrote a book called On True Doctrine, which was, of course, the philosophy of the pagan world, and
Mm,
he had scorn for Christians. And
mm.
you know, his basic argument, his most basic argument, is that Christianity can't be true because it appeals to wool workers and
Oh.
shoemakers and all of these people who practice these ignoble professions.
Hmm.
Well, you know, the more you mock people like that for the Christianity, well, the more popular and appealing Christianity becomes with those people. The more
Yeah.
they treasure what they receive through Christianity, which recognizes their innate dignity.
Yeah.
And so Christianity grew, I believe, because of this respect for the dignity of work and
Mhm.
workers.
Mhm.
So we find in the early Christians a certain identification with their work, right?
Yeah.
And even when they die, you know, they'll have symbols of their trade on the ancient tombstones
Mm.
in the catacombs. It'll be scratched into plaster, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so there's this love for their work. Um, you know, I wanted to bring that out just again because it shows the contrast between the
Mhm.
pagan attitude and the emerging Christian attitude, and I think that's a partial explanation for Christianity's success.
Yeah.
This recognition of the dignity of ordinary labor and ordinary laborers was something that was widely appealing.
Yeah. Gosh, that reminds me of the story that I heard a few months ago about this woman who lived in Spain, and in Spain, well, I won't give away the the punchline, but she was being interviewed about her work, and she just kept saying, "Gosh, I just love coming into work every day. I love the people that I work with, and being able to serve my community is just something that just means so much to me." And she just kind of went on, and then somebody finally asked her, like, excuse me, senora, like, what is your job? And she's like, oh, I'm a street sweeper. I
There
stand
you
in the
go.
corner of this
Yeah.
particular street in Madrid. And everyone was shocked, but also just humbled by how she found value and joy in her work, where everyone else might see that that's such a meaningless task. But to her, she was serving her neighbors, she was serving her friends, and it was an opportunity for her to bring the best of herself in that context. And she loved it.
Yeah. And this is a consequence of our belief, our belief about God. We believe that
Mhm.
God is omnipresent. We believe that God is omnipotent. He's
Yeah.
everywhere. He's all powerful. So he is with us when we're working, and he's
Yeah.
working with us, and he's working through us,
Yeah.
even if we don't do our job particularly well.
Mm.
Even if we're working at a job that is a little bit beyond us, he's
Mhm.
working with us, and he'll be
Yeah.
with us even in our failure, so that
Yeah.
even our failures are efficacious. Remember what I said earlier, that Jesus died as a failure by worldly standards,
Yeah.
but his suffering was efficacious. His
Yeah.
suffering had value because he made it an offering to the Father.
Yeah.
When we're living in Christ and when we're offering our work, then it takes on that value. St. Paul
Yeah.
gives us the key to it all in his letter to the Colossians, first chapter. He says,
Uh-huh.
in my flesh, I make up what is lacking in the
Yeah.
suffering of Christ for the sake of his body, the church, for the sake of others, right?
Mhm.
Well, what's
Mhm.
lacking in the suffering of Christ? Nothing. It was perfect, except nothing except what he willed to be lacking, so that we, as his younger brothers, could
Mm.
step up to the task, so
Yeah.
that we could imitate him, and not only imitate him, but also participate in his life, participate in his work, so
Yeah.
that when we go to work, we're working with his touch,
Yeah.
not ours. And that's
Yeah.
more powerful than the touch of
Yes.
King Midas. Everything
Mhm.
King Midas touched in the ancient legend, everything King Midas touched turned to gold. But
Mhm.
everything we touch turns to glory. That's so
Ooh,
much better.
I love that.
So do I.
Wow. Okay, so in a practical way, how can someone, the everyday person, offer their work to God? Is it simply just praying, God, I give you this email that I'm going to send, or I offer up this meeting that I'm going to go to? Like, how do we do that in a practical way? Or how have you done it in
Yeah,
your daily life?
I think a good and important way to start is by making a prayer that's been constant in Christianity and even constant in Judaism before that, making a prayer called the morning offering.
Mm.
The most important sacrifice that the priests offered in the temple was
Uh-huh.
the morning offering, because
Really?
that was the one that set the agenda for the whole day. If you begin
Ah,
well, you're more likely to end well. Well
yeah,
begun is half done, as the saying goes, right?
yeah, yeah.
Well, this is beginning well with our day by offering
Mm,
everything in the day to God, making that
mm,
virtual offering for all the prayers, works, joys, and sufferings of the rest of the day.
yeah,
When
yeah.
I learned how to do this when I was in grade school. Um,
Mm-hmm,
but as I said, Christians have been doing this for thousands of years, and the Jews did it before that.
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
we can learn from that, and then we can kind of extend that practice by trying to be conscious as we begin a new task during the
Mm,
day, as we
mm-hmm.
turn from one task to another,
Yeah,
offering this new task
yeah,
for a certain prayer intention. Our
yeah.
friends who are sick, our friends who are struggling, our friends, who are trying to patch up a marriage.
Mm-hmm,
All of these things, these prayer intentions that we have and we naturally take to God, well,
yeah,
we can supernaturally offer them as
yeah,
priests
Yeah.
offering them in Christ as a priestly act.
Yeah.
And it changes the way we look at them,
It
because
does.
I have friends who are suffering, and there's so much I want to do to
Mm-hmm.
alleviate their suffering, and I can't.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
we're circumscribed. We have limits.
Yeah.
But then, we look at how we can make this offering for their sake,
Yeah.
and we can make a difference. We believe
Yeah.
in the power of prayer, so we can renew the morning offering, and with
Yeah.
a particular emphasis as we begin each task through the day. That's the
Mhm.
way I try to do it.
No, and that's so beautiful. And thank you for explaining that, because many times people have said, offer it up. And I've
Yes.
always just wondered, like, okay, what does that mean? But now fully understanding the context of how Adam is like a priest and offered up his work to God,
Yeah.
that makes more sense.
Yeah. I spend all my day sitting at this desk. This desk is my altar. That's my
Mm,
altar. If you're
yeah,
a mom and you're standing at the changing table to change
yeah,
diapers,
yeah,
that's your altar.
yeah.
If you're standing over a stovetop, a cooktop,
Mm,
making dinner, that's your altar. You
yeah,
look at it as an altar of sacrifice, and you're the
yeah,
priest standing there, with your arms outstretched or not,
yeah.
because you have to stir the pot,
Dinner's
right?
ready.
You have to change the diaper, right? But you are
Yeah,
making that offering
yeah,
with, consciously, if you can, but at
yeah.
least virtually through the morning offering.
Hmm. Gosh, thank you for explaining that. Yes, I agree. Okay, so then on the flip side, let's say someone does understand the dignity and value of their work, yet they're in an environment where they don't feel valued by their employer. Like whether they have like a boss that's very negative, or they're in a position where it doesn't pay enough that they can support their family. What advice would you give to somebody in that situation?
Well, once again, I keep coming back to this fact of the cross,
Mm,
and that our Lord's most efficacious act, his most successful work, was a seeming failure, was
mm,
was a rejection by those who had earthly authority over him. So that's why, I keep a cross on my desk, right?
mm,
uh because there are times during the day when I need just to put my hand on it and
yeah,
and identify with our Lord that way, and I need to do it consciously,
yeah,
because it doesn't come naturally to me.
yeah.
I don't like it when my books get bad reviews. I don't
Yeah,
like it. I don't like it when a client suddenly, changes course on a project midstream. I don't
yeah,
like it.
yeah,
And so you need to unite yourself to the cross. And if you're uncomfortable, keeping an actual cross on your desk, get two paper clips, make a cross out of them, put them on your desk. No
ah,
one will know except you and
yeah,
your Lord, and it will be there
oh,
to remind you that the cross will be part of your day, and it'll be
yeah,
probably at least a small part of every day.
yeah. Oh, no, that's beautiful. And I think the idea of the cross is not something we talk enough about as Christians. I think I know for myself, like I want to shun and run away from the cross, but yet it's in those difficult moments where I found that when I actually do enter into them, I encounter God the most. Not
Yes.
only His presence, but He redeems something and heals something that He, I won't say He couldn't have done in the happy moments, but
Yes.
it just has a more lasting impact in those challenging moments.
Who likes suffering? Who likes pain? Who
Yeah,
likes who likes failure? By
yeah,
worldly standards, none of us like this. Who likes rejection? Nobody likes that. But if we're looking at life realistically, if we're looking at our work every day as something we're doing out of love, out of service, then we'll
mhm,
see the value in suffering, you know, because all of love entails this level of suffering that we
yeah,
give for the other. We give
yeah,
until it hurts. Man, you think of what lovers do, young lovers do. They'll stay up all night to write a beautiful poem or a love letter, to
yeah,
the other.
yeah,
They'll put themselves through the rigors, and they'll like it. I can remember when I first met the woman who would become my wife,
uh-huh,
and we were both in college, and she
uh-huh,
had to walk across campus.
uh-huh.
I went to Penn State. It's a huge campus, right?
Okay, okay.
So we had to walk across campus. It was below zero,
Oh,
terrible wind chill.
Oh
and
gosh.
she had forgotten to bring gloves. So I could
Oh.
see that she was very cold, and she was trying
Mm-hmm.
to work her hands. I had gloves. So I took off my gloves and I gave them to her.
Aw.
I'll tell you what, the pain that I was feeling in my hands was glorious, glorious, because I knew that I was
Yeah.
doing this for this wonderful,
Oh.
beautiful woman who was
Yeah.
walking with me. I was
Yeah.
doing that for her. And the more my hands hurt, the more I was giving. And I experienced that
Oh.
as a kind of joy, even though the pain did not go away. That's the way our work is. That's the way our love is.
Yeah.
That's the way our suffering can
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
If we learn how to unite it with Jesus on the cross,
Yeah.
in my flesh, I make up what is lacking in the suffering of Christ for the sake of his body, the
Yeah.
church, those other people in my life.
Yeah. No, wow, that is so beautiful. And I'm sure your wife was like, yes, he's a keeper.
Well, it's
Yeah.
that was almost 40 years ago now. So, yeah.
Oh, wow. Gosh. And I just as a little side note, for anyone who is in a work situation where you do feel like God is calling you to change careers and maybe just work somewhere else, I do offer that service. I am a career coach, and I would be
Excellent.
happy to work with you. But as Mike said, in the interim, as you're in the moment that God has allowed you to be in, it is an opportunity to offer it up as a sacrifice, offering it up for those in your life that you care for and that maybe are going through a hard time. So just want to put that out there. So just last couple questions, Mike. As you know, we're still in a global pandemic.
Yes.
And I know that it's affected and made me and others in my life reflect on how I spend and we spend our time and what we do in our work. So, in what ways can Jesus and Joseph now in our time period serve as a model for us as we wrestle with the questions of what am I made to do? Like, what should I be doing? Or should this how I should be spending my time?
Well, if we look at the life of Joseph and the life of Jesus, we see that that they were lives full of displacement, tumult.
Mm,
I'm sure uh, frequent unemployment. If you think about what Joseph had to do in order to uproot his family and travel a
mm,
thousand miles to a new country,
yeah,
he was unemployed during a certain period. He was
that's
occupied,
true.
but he was unemployed. He had to get to Egypt, then he had to get established, then he had to find work in a place where he
Mm,
probably didn't know others. It
mm-hmm,
was a Jewish culture. He likely lived in a Jewish community around a synagogue.
mm-hmm,
But so he would have had a start, but only a start.
yeah,
So we have to lean into it. We have to look at our circumstances and ask what we can do. If we find that we're out of work and we can't seem to get back into work, we
mm-hmm,
should apply ourselves with service nonetheless,
mm-hmm,
because people need us. What
yeah,
we're learning through all this is that we need those people who were waiting tables. We need
mm-hmm,
those people who were cooking meals. We
yeah,
need those people who were driving taxis when suddenly they're not there for us. We miss them. uh,
mm-hmm,
so so many of us have to gain an appreciation of the workers who serve us and
yeah,
treat them with the dignity they deserve, and
absolutely.
and do what we can to see that they're getting the wage they deserve.
I agree.
Often we participate in systems that are bad for these workers. We'll
Mm-hmm,
go for the cheaper price if we
yeah,
even though we know that this person isn't making a lot of money.
mm-hmm,
We'll give some minimal tip even though we
mm-hmm,
know that this person's not taking a lot of money home at the end
yeah,
of the day. So
yeah,
we should be aware of these things. We should do what we can to change it, either
mm-hmm,
by leaning into our opportunities for work ourselves, or by
mm-hmm,
treating other workers that we encounter with the dignity they deserve.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Okay, Mike, I feel like I could continue to talk to you all day.
Well, that would be fun.
That would be a lot of fun. So, for others who would like to learn more about you, about your books, and about your work, where can they find you?
Well, I have a website. It's called fathersofthechurch.com. That's I've written most of my books about the church fathers. So the website is fathersofthechurch.com. If you want to find my books, go to catholicbooksdirect.com. catholicbooksdirect.com. They have a Mike Aquilina page. Just put my name in the search bar and you'll get all my books. So those are the two best places to find me.
Awesome. And just want to put in a plug for your new podcast. I've started listening to it and I really like it, but can you just tell a little bit about it?
My podcast is called Way of the Fathers, and it's about ancient Christianity, about the first 7 centuries of Christianity, and it's sponsored by catholicculture.org. So you can find it online at catholicculture.org. Again, it's titled Way of the Fathers.
Okay, great. Well, Mike, thank you again for your time. It's been a pleasure talking with you about work, and I just admire what you do, and I learned a lot through our conversation, and I just wish you all the best in this new year. So thank you again.
Well, I've had a great time. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. All right. Goodbye, everyone. See you at the next episode.